To our panel. I want to begin with you, Emmanuel Navon. You're in Jerusalem. The escalation of rhetoric, you heard Maj Nahidi describe it, and it's been on both sides since the last week. In your view, what's happened? Why is it that last Friday we were close to a truce? That's at least what Hamas spokespeople had been saying. And now we're close to a ground invasion, it seems.
Well, the answer is very simple. The facts answer your question. Hamas continued to fire at Israeli cities and towns. At the time on Friday, the Israeli Prime Minister declared that quiet will be answered by quiet, except that Hamas did not hold its guns and instead of that decided for its own reason to continue firing at Israel until the Israeli government decided that this could no longer last. As you know, no government, no country would accept a terrorist organization firing at its cities, at its citizens, and therefore the government decided to reply.
But what's interesting is that there's this, the Israeli government giving the green light for the call-up of those reservists, those extra reservists. Already there's been 1,500. But that hasn't happened yet.
Well, there has been today, as you know, a calling for 40,000 reservists, and it looks like we are preparing for a ground invasion that would be similar to the one that happened in December 2008, and also to the one that almost happened in November 2012. In order to stop those firing missiles at our cities, the IDF, the Air Force, is, as you know, hitting military targets. But without, apparently, the Israeli government apparently has reached the conclusion that without a ground operation, it will not be possible to completely stop this firing at our cities.
Ask you, Emmanuel Navon. Since the last major invasion of Gaza, 2008, 2009, how come there isn't more of a long-term strategy to prevent this, what was just described a moment ago by Alain Dikoff, this cycle of truce, then escalation, then truce, then escalation?
The reason is simple. The reason is that Hamas is not fighting for an independent state living side by side peacefully with Israel. Hamas's very raison d'etre is the destruction of Israel. The charter of Hamas is a violently anti-Semitic charter that calls for the murder of Jews wherever they are. And therefore, there's no possible political solution with Hamas, at least a political solution that includes the very existence of Israel, regardless of its borders. That doesn't interest Hamas. And because there is no political solution with Hamas, we keep going from military operations to military operation. Is that an ideal situation? No, it is not. But again, since Hamas is not fighting for a peaceful solution, but for the destruction of Israel, there can be no political solution with that organization.
Emmanuel Navon, do you agree that Benjamin Netanyahu is the prisoner of his coalition?
No, I don't. Neither do I agree with what Alain Dikoff said, because Israel has made and has offered many compromises in the past 15 years, and these compromises have been rejected by the Palestinian Authority. It happened at Camp David in July 2000. It happened at Taba in December 2000 under the government of Ehud Barak. It happened also under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas when he was offered by Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert a Palestinian state on 99.5% of the West Bank and Gaza with land swaps, separation, a division of Jerusalem, a sharing of sovereignty of Jerusalem, all the things that Alain Dikoff has been describing. This has been offered by Israel and rejected by the Palestinians. So I really don't know what he's talking about.
Emmanuel Navon, why couldn't, during the last round of U.S. brokered talks, Benjamin Netanyahu have done something simple, which is sit down in the same room as Mahmoud Abbas?
He asked for it many times. He's the one who said many times, not only during his present administration, but also during his previous administration, between 2009 and 2012. He said many times, why do we have to meet in New York? There is a 20-minute drive between Ramallah and Jerusalem. Let's meet and talk about peace. But during the 4 years of the previous Netanyahu administration, between 2009 and 2012, Abbas refused to negotiate despite the fact that Netanyahu agreed to a settlement freeze, despite the fact that in the present negotiations he agreed to free Palestinian prisoners and murderers. But Abbas simply refused to negotiate during the previous administration.
Navon?
Well, first of all, when I mentioned the previous offer, it was made by Ehud Olmert and not by Netanyahu, the offer that was rejected by Mahmoud Abbas. You mentioned what you call the Arab Peace Initiative. What you forget to mention is that the Arab Peace Initiative includes the so-called right of return, which would effectively turn Israel into a binational state with an Arab minority, while at the same time, Mahmoud Abbas declares that in the potential Palestinian state, he would not accept the presence of any single Jew. So Israel is not willing to commit suicide demographically, especially when Mahmoud Abbas himself says that he will never, and he said it many times in the recent weeks and months, he will never give up on this so-called right of return, which would basically invade Israel with millions of descendants of 1948 refugees, while at the same time he said himself that he will not accept any Jewish minority in the Palestinian state.
Yes, but you know that he said that, but he said also different things from time to time. Don't you think that it's something that can be negotiated and not treated just as a bone of contention?
Well, we've been trying to negotiate for the past 20 years, and I'm just wondering when we should be believing Mahmoud Abbas, when we shouldn't. I would just like to quote what Dennis Ross said in his book, The Missing Piece. How many times do you have to hear the word no to understand no?
Emmanuel Navon?
Well, you know, I understand that Alain Dikov decided to get into the blame game, but I just want to remind you that, first of all, the conflict did not start with those settlements. The conflict existed before those settlements, before 1967, and therefore they're obviously not the source of the conflict. Moreover, Israel removed all its settlements from the Gaza Strip in 2005. What did we get in return? Thousands of missiles, and we're still getting them as I'm talking to you. And in 2008, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert offered to remove most of those settlements for a peace agreement. And again, Mahmoud Abbas said no. So again, the settlements are not the source of the conflict. The conflict existed before. There are many other reasons why a solution hasn't been found until today.
Navon, you agree?
Well, I would not agree with the comparison between Israel's National Religious Party and Hamas, but I would agree with the fact that what we are witnessing today in the Middle East is the complete collapse of artificial nation states basically imposed by Europe after World War I, and the emergence of a political Islam trying to replace those nation states. We're seeing this in Iraq. We're seeing it in Syria, we're seeing it in Libya. And therefore, as we are experiencing and witnessing the collapse of those artificial nation states, the world is coming to us today asking to establish, to create a 23rd failed Arab state. And contrary to what was said before, there's no occupied Palestine because there was no such state in the past. When the League of Nations gave a mandate to the British Empire, it was to create a Jewish national home. There was no Palestinian state in the past, and therefore there's no Palestinian occupied territory. This is legally nonsense.
All right. Beyond the semantics of it, though, what we're seeing today is that people inside of the Israeli government are equating Hamas with jihadists. Isn't that counterproductive? Because at the end of the day, it's not at all the same agenda. And we're, as we're describing it, this issue of never being able to compromise with some people, perhaps distinguish between those various shades of Islamist.
Well, this is a little bit like distinguish it between the political and the military wings, for example, of Hezbollah or other organizations. As far as we are concerned here in Israel, when we receive missiles on our heads, on our cities, as we are as I am talking. It doesn't really matter if it's from Islamic Jihad or Hamas. But I think it would be wise to believe and to listen to what those organizations actually say. And it doesn't really matter how they call themselves. It matters what they believe and what they're really and willing to do in order to carry out their programs and their beliefs and their ideology.